give us our first slide. This is a PowerPoint presentation, and correct me if I'm wrong, brothers, given at an Army lecture that he was called to do to other doctors, other psychologists in the United States Army. Isn't that right?
Yes, this presentation was from June 2007. So he gave this presentation in June 2007. It was supposed to be a presentation on a medical topic in front of other military doctors. And when he came in, he decided to give a presentation on how Muslims are going to be affected by being in the United States military. And so he gave his presentation. Many people were shocked, but as we saw yesterday, no one complained about this presentation because everyone was afraid that they'd be labeled as Islamophobic. I mean, can you imagine someone watching a presentation and running to their leaders and saying, this guy's given a presentation on Islam and how Muslims are going to be conflicted if they're in the military and how they might go off and kill people based on the Quran? Well, you'd be a big meanie, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You couldn't do that.
Right.
And yes, people refused to say anything, and of course, 14 people died.
That would be judging. And
yes,
why should you judge anyone? You might save 14 lives.
Exactly. You need to repent.
All right, so look at what we have here. Notice that this is the Quranic worldview as it relates to Muslims in the U.S. military. Notice he doesn't say the extremist, Muslim, radical, terrorist worldview as it relates to Muslims in the U.S. military. He is specifically saying this is the view of the Quran. This is the position of the Quran. And I have to say he's absolutely right. Now, let's go to the next slide. The concept of jihad. By the way, we are shortening this a bit. He had a presentation on the 5 pillars of Islam and all sorts of topics included in this presentation, but we want to focus on the slides that are most relevant.
And you can find that, by the way. Don't take our word for it. Go to different sites on the internet, different news sites. You can find this PowerPoint presentation available on the computer. So you go find it if you doubt this is exactly what he did.
And by the way, I think I'm going to start using this as a PowerPoint presentation when I speak about Islam, because this is very, very good. So the concept of jihad, it comes from Arabic jihad, from jahada, which means to strive. And he gives 2 Islamic definitions, uses of the term. It can refer to an individual striving for spiritual self-perfection, or more commonly here in the West, a Muslim holy war or spiritual struggle against infidels. And finally, as used by Westerners or non-Muslims, we can use jihad in the sense of a crusade or some kind of struggle. Now, notice down at the bottom, struggles inside oneself are termed the greater jihad, and struggles with outside forces, the lesser jihad. It's called greater because you're constantly fighting a jihad against inner desires and so on, whereas the struggle against outside forces is occasional.
Quick question for our viewers. Notice he said on there that Islam, jihad is a holy war or spiritual war. Can I see that slide that you have there? Is a holy war or spiritual war, the previous one that you just had. What does that mean then? Notice he says a Muslim, Islam, a Muslim holy war or spiritual struggle against infidels. So he doesn't define the holy war. We always hear Muslims say jihad is a spiritual struggle, but he's got that over against a holy war. What do you think he means, the holy war part?
Well, it's very clear what he means given the text of what the rest of the slides say. Okay. He's right on the money on what these texts teach. Go ahead to the next slide. Now, Muslims in the military. This is why Muslims in the military are going to be conflicted. Surah 4:93. And whoever kills a believer intentionally, whenever Muslim kills a fellow Muslim, whoever kills a believer intentionally, his punishment is hell. He shall abide in it, and Allah will send His wrath on him and curse him and prepare for him a painful chastisement. So, if a Muslim kills another Muslim, he is bound for hell. There's no way around it. That's what you're stuck with according to the Quran. And of course in 1733 we read, and do not kill anyone whose killing Allah has forbidden except for a just cause. So Allah has forbidden you to kill your fellow Muslims. Don't do it. So any Muslim in the military must be tremendously afraid if there's a war where that war is causing that military to fight against Muslims. Because if you're called out to go fight somewhere and you take part in some operation that kills a fellow Muslim, according to the Quran, you are destined for hell. So you can imagine the fear that Muslims will face by being part of the United States military.
Brother David, I just want to make a quick comment to our viewers. The context of that Surah 493 is a context of jihad. Because in 489 it talks about not the munafiqun, those who refuse to forsake their homes and go in the way of jihad. And then 495, that's the verse before. The verse after 495 talks about there's two different grades of believers. Those who stay at home and then those who go and fight jihad. So I want people to realize this isn't out of context. This is the context of jihad.
Absolutely right. Next slide. I want to try and get through all these pretty quickly. So, adverse events. This is important because later on he says we need to get we need to allow Muslims to leave the military because of adverse events. So what does he mean by adverse events? Well, he refers to things like Hassan Akbar from the 101st Airborne Division, who threw grenades, killing and wounding his fellow soldiers. He's referring to things like Army Captain James Lee, a Muslim who was charged with espionage, although he was acquitted. Marine Corporal Wasif Ali Hassoun, who deserted in Iraq. He cited that since he was a Muslim, he could not fight in the war in Iraq. And Army Sergeant Abdullah William Webster, who refused to go to Iraq based on religious beliefs. So he's referring to basically every sort of reaction a dedicated Muslim could have in the United States military, and he says that we need to avoid these adverse events. Next slide, please. Now, the Quran. This is part of his introduction to various Muslim topics, and he says that the Quran was revealed 1,400 years ago and so on. Notice down at the bottom, towards the bottom, he refers to, well, above that, he says progressive revelation. Verses were revealed as situations and events presented. This is what so many Muslims who call into the show fail to realize, and this is something that Sam and I and Joseph are constantly pointing to, that this was progressive revelation. Not every verse of the Quran is on equal ground.
Right.
So we have the hadiths, we have the sirah, we have the asbab, an-nuzul. These are aids in context and order. In other words, these are every source that we have that can tell us what's the origin. What are the origins of these verses that can tell us which verse came later, which verse came former, and therefore which verse has been abrogated and which verse still applies today. And down at the bottom, of course, he has the rule of abrogation. The rule of abrogation. This is very important. Let's go to the next slide. And what do we find in the next slide? Well, we find the exact same passages that Sam and I constantly refer to when Muslims try to point to a verse like Surah 2:256 and say that's what Muslims are commanded to do today. No, this is the pattern we find in the Quran. This is how you interpret texts of the Quran according to the Quran itself. We have in 2:106, none of our revelations do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, but we substitute something better or similar. Knowest thou not that Allah hath power over all things? And in 16:101 we find, when we substitute one revelation for another, and Allah knows best what He reveals in stages, they say, thou art but a forger. But most of them understand not. Now, what's interesting about these passages is that both of them were revealed in the context of unbelievers criticizing Muhammad and Islam for constantly changing the rules. They were mocking Muhammad and Muslims and saying, look, Muhammad comes along with one revelation and then he totally contradicts it a few days later. How can you people follow this? And that's the context, the historical context of the revelation of these verses. This was the response from Allah. Of course, verses are being changed all the time. But that's because Allah has something better in mind for you. But what we find is that if a verse comes later and seems to conflict with a former verse, it's because the latter applies now. Allah has given you something better. So let's go to the next slide. The concept of complete submission. And this is a very interesting part of this presentation. In Surah 2:208, we read, O you who believe, enter into Islam completely, wholeheartedly. And the purpose of this, in the context of Major Hassan's presentation, is to show that Muslims are to be completely obedient. They aren't to say, no, well, I don't like that revelation, so I'm just going to believe whatever I want to believe. They're not allowed to do that. They have to enter Islam wholeheartedly. and they have to drop anything that goes against Islam.
And that would leave no room in their heart for any real loyalty to another higher power such as the United States military.
Absolutely, absolutely, no question. And go to the next verse and you'll see the example that he gives. And the example that Major Hasan gives is Abraham. He refers to Abraham as the gold standard. The gold standard. This is as good as it gets. He gives some various passages. Abraham was indeed a model, devoutly obedient. Abraham was without doubt forbearing. Allah took him as an intimate friend. Now, where's he going with this? Go to the next slide. In Surah 37, 102, we read the story about Abraham in 37. And when he attained to working with him, he said, "O my son, surely I have seen in a dream that I should sacrifice you." Abraham is about to sacrifice his son. He said, "O my father, do what you are commanded. If Allah please, you will find me one of the patient ones." And what does it say about Abraham? Because of his willingness to obey God in sacrificing his own son, most surely this is a manifest trial, and we perpetuated praise to Abraham among the later generations. Praise for what? For his willingness to obey God, even if it involved killing someone who is very close to him. Peace be on Ibrahim. Thus do we reward the doers of good. Surely he was one of our believing servants. So what's the point of this text for Major Hasan? The point is you have to be willing to follow Allah, even if he commands you to do something like kill your own children. You have to obey him no matter what. So if you're confronted with a command of Allah and it commands you to do something you don't like, you obey it anyway. This is very important because later on he's going to get into some of the texts that Muslims are commanded to follow. Next slide, please.
And Brother David, Surah 2 verse 216 says, fighting has been made obligatory for you, much to your dislike.
Yes, much to your dislike.
It is quite possible that something which you don't like is good for you.
Yes, absolutely. All right, now on this slide we see lack of submission. Lack of submission. What happens if you do not submit? So we've seen that you are called to submit to Allah. If you are a Muslim, you are called to submit to Allah. And what happens if you refuse? What happens if you go according to your own understanding? What happens if you just go with what you like rather than obeying Allah and everything? Well, 265, and certainly you have known those among you who exceeded the limits of the Sabbath. So he said to them, be as apes, despised and hated. This, of course, is referring to the Jews. Say, shall I inform you of him who is worse than this? In retribution from Allah, worse is he whom Allah has cursed and brought his wrath upon, and of whom he made apes and swine. 7166, we read, therefore, when they revoltingly persisted in what they had been forbidden, we said to them, be as apes, despised and hated. So this is what you're stuck with if you reject Allah. He's going to do some very bad stuff to you. Now, as far as rewards are concerned, go to the next slide, please.
It's going to make you
rewards. Yeah. In Surah 76, we have several passages telling what the reward for Muslims who are obedient. So if you reject, you've seen what happens. But if you're obedient, here's what you have. And their recompense shall be paradise and silken garments, because they were patient. Reclining therein on raised thrones, they will see there neither the excessive heat of the sun, nor the excessive bitter cold, and the shade thereof is close upon them, and the bunches of fruit thereof will hang low within their reach. And amongst them will be passed round vessels of silver and cups of crystal. Can we go to the next slide? Here's a better description. The description of paradise, which the pious have been promised, is that in it are rivers of water, and taste and smell of which are not changed, rivers of milk of which the taste never changes, rivers of wine delicious to those who drink, and rivers of clarified honey, clear and pure. Therein for them is every kind of fruit and forgiveness from their Lord. This is what you receive if you are obedient to Allah. If, like Abraham, you are willing to follow Allah's commands perfectly and not go with your own understanding. And if Allah commands you to kill, you are obedient to him and you kill. Now let's go on to the next slide. What's the punishment for people who reject these commands and for the people you might have to kill if you are a Muslim? Well, if people are unbelievers, here's what we have in 850. And if you could see when the angels take away the souls of those who disbelieve at death. So this is what happens to the disbelievers. They smite their faces and their backs, and saying, taste the punishment of blazing fire. Verily, the tree of Zakum will be the food of sinners. Like boiling oil, it will boil in the bellies. Like the boiling of scalding water, it will be said, seize him and drag him into the midst of blazing fire. Next slide, please. The passage continues. Then pour over his head the torments of boiling water. Taste you this verily. You were pretending to be the mighty, the generous. Verily, this is that whereof you used to doubt. Surely those who disbelieve in our ayat, our verses, our signs, we shall burn them in fire. And as often as their skins are roasted through, we shall change them for other skins, that they may taste the punishment. Truly, Allah is ever most powerful, all-wise. So if you refuse to be obedient to Allah's teachings, or if you're an unbeliever on a military base, you're not worth much in Allah's eyes. And so what awaits you? Well, we've seen what awaits you. Now we get into the good passages. Let's go on to the next page, and this is important because this is exactly what Sam and I have been saying for years. This is exactly what we've been saying. So as far as jihad is concerned, how does abrogation apply when we're discussing jihad? Well, he gives a basic outline. In Mecca, Muslims were not permitted to defend themselves or to fight. Muslims were not even permitted to defend themselves when they're in Mecca. Their only job was to deliver the message. And we have peaceful verses of the Quran, such as Surah 109, that were revealed during this time. Then we have the emigration to Medina when Muslims left Mecca. And at this point, self-defense was allowed. At this point, Muslims could defend themselves, which abrogated earlier revelations telling Muslims they could not fight. But this wasn't the end. See, Muslims want to stop here and say, these are the only passages that apply. Defensive passages, wrong, wrong. What we have next, and Major Hasan is absolutely correct here, then offensive fighting was allowed. And what we have, the pattern we have, is that later verses abrogate the former. And notice what he says, i.e., peaceful verses no longer apply. This is not me saying it. This is not Sam Shamoon saying it. This is a Muslim giving a presentation, an educated Muslim in the United States military, saying that peaceful verses, verses like 256, Surah 109, these verses no longer apply. Let's go on to the next slide, please.
And remember, by all accounts, he is a good Muslim. He led the prayers in his